Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to make some jigs with our 3D printer. Well, kinda, sorta. We're going to use our 3D printer to make some fishing jigs. So I figured I make hard baits, I make soft plastics, I do make jigs, but since I'm doing everything else custom, might as well make some custom jigs too. I'm used to pouring the molds. I use the Do It molds quite a bit, but I'm kind of hitting a wall with that. So this is the jig I go through the most of. This is a store-bought tog jig. I know they call them bottom sweeper jigs a lot, but blackfish to tog. If you're from the south, think of sheep's head. It's a very similar style of fishing. Great tasting fish, super hard fighting fish. But if you're not losing jigs, you're not in the right spot. So these jigs add up and get very expensive very quickly. So like I said before, this is a store bought. This is what I usually like to use. I do pour some of my own jigs using molds. This is the closest mold that Do It makes. It's a banana jig mold. It's pretty much the same body shape and everything, but there's some things I don't like about it. Number one is the hooks are kind of low quality and they're also massive for blackfish. So I wanted to make my own to better incorporate my own design and fix that. The other thing, I don't know if you can see it on the mold cavity, is there's this giant collar on the hook, and that makes it a pain in the butt to get the crab on. It doesn't sit right. Also makes it so you need a bigger hook. So we're gonna make our own. Now you're probably thinking to yourself, how do you make jigs with a 3D printer? I mean, lead melts at, I don't know, like 600 or 700 degrees, something like that. Don't fact check that. But basically, there's no way you're pouring that in plastic without melting the plastic or resin or whatever, whether it's a resin printer or a FDM printer. So we're going to use our 3D printer not to make a mold, but to make a mold of a mold. So this is the design I threw together. Um, this is kind of like a proof of concept thing. I haven't done this before. There's not too much information online about making jigs with what we're going to make them out of, or making jig molds rather. But it's supposed to work. It's supposed to have a pretty decent shot life. They don't last forever, but I've heard people getting up to 100 pours out of them, which is plenty good for me with the amount of money we're going to spend on this, which isn't much. So right now I have these two halves I printed out on my FDM printer. Basically, the goal is when I fill these with material and cures, it's going to give me two halves of the lead mold. Now, what we're going to be making this out of is bondo or body filler and fiberglass resin. So we're going to mix that up, cast it in here, and then cast our molten lead into that bondo mold. There's a couple different materials people make these molds out of. There's really not many people that 3D print the masters, but people have been doing this for a while. Bondo is a big one. RTV silicone is supposed to be the best one, but it's fairly expensive and also kind of hard to work with. I didn't really feel like dealing with that. The other one is going to be Derm's water putty or some kind of plaster. That works too. It's a lot cheaper, but the shot life isn't as much. And you also need to make sure to dry that mold out really well because they will retain moisture, and molten metal and water do not mix at all. So I already got these. I got some mold release on them. I'm just using pan baking spray. That's just so this doesn't stick to it. And what we're going to do is we're going to mix up some of this body filler and we're going to cut it with fiberglass resin. This stuff is too thick to cast it on its own. It won't form a very good mold. So we thin it out with this stuff. We're looking for the consistency of like honey. And then we're going to slowly pour it in this so we don't get any air bubbles in it, because any air bubbles that are on the actual bit itself are going to come out in the mold and it's not going to look right. So we're going to slowly pour this in a special way so we don't have too many bubbles. I'm going to mix this up and show you guys how I do that. And then we'll clamp these two halves together and then see how the lead goes. All right, so we'll spoon out enough bondo for our mold in here. All right, so as you guys can see, this stuff is extremely thick and would be terrible to make a mold out of or cast anything out of, really. So we are going to thin it out with this fiberglass resin, and then just continually mix that up. I would add a little at a time. We're looking for a certain consistency here, because if you add too much, it's too thin, it is more likely to shrink. So that looks pretty decent. I'm gonna add a little bit more. Next, we have to add the body filler hardener to it. And this will cure both the fiberglass resin and the bondo. All right, so the trick to this now is not getting any air bubbles. So what we want to do is kind of just drizzle it over the body of the bait. That way it's a super thin coat, and it gives any air bubbles in the bondo a chance to pop. We'll do that for this half. Drizzle over the body again. And we actually pour this. We want to pour it, not that fast. It's supposed to be a slow stream. All right, we'll try that again. When we pour this, we want like a very slow stream from a little higher up off the table. That way it gives any air bubbles the best chance to pop on the way down, kind of like that. Slow that down a little bit, and then just let it flood over the top of the bait. All right, so I'm going to give these a little while to cure. I tried this once so far. The molds came out all right. My design was off. I didn't test them with lead yet. But from my experience, these molds are one-time use, not the actual mold it makes, but the mold to make the mold. You kind of got to chisel these apart to get the bait out of them. So I'm going to let these cure. We'll knock these molds apart, and then we'll hit them with some lead. All right, these are all cured, so we're going to crack them open. So yeah, it was a lot harder to get apart than expected. I don't think the mold release worked too well this time, and the alignment pins got kind of stuck. I cut them flush. This was a prototype anyway, so it didn't really come out too great. But in all honesty, I don't really care how well the mold comes out. All that really matters is how long it lasts and how well the jig comes out. So I'm going to clamp this together. I'm waiting for the lead to heat up now. So we're going to pour in this mold. And I'm also going to pour one of the do-its just so we have a comparison. Oh, it doesn't work. I'm gonna try some better clamping. All right, I don't think that leaked. We'll see if it flashed though. The I smell cooking bondo. That don't look right. All right, let me see if I can give this one more try. Alrighty, so today I wouldn't exactly call it a success, but I'm going to call it a mild success. I was debating on whether or not I was going to scrap this video, but I know when I first started making baits, there really wasn't much information out online, especially the 3D printing, and a lot of it was very frustrating. I had lots and lots of failures. So I think it would be beneficial to show you guys some of the stuff that doesn't go exactly to plan. And it'll be a good learning experience to keep going, keep fighting through it. You'll figure it out eventually, but that's the most important part there is never give up. All my first baits were horrible. They sucked. And then I just sat down and kept redoing it and redoing it and redoing it until I got it right. I think my first bait took me like, actually, I'll show it off. This was the first bait I ever designed. I might release this one eventually. It's a little close to my heart right now, but this is like version 37. So, and this is a monster striped bass bait that works extremely well. So that's just a lesson on don't give up, keep trying. But we're going to go over the wins and the losses here. So I did kind of get this to work. Of course, the last try I gave it off camera worked, but I digress. This was version 1, which you guys saw. It poured out onto my table because it wasn't clamped together correctly. I'll give you a little more idea on this mold. So I'm going to tweak this some. Number one, I didn't have nearly enough of mold release on here. I had to break off the alignment pins. This is actually part of the mold for the mold that snapped off here. And I just cut those flush to make it work for the video. This little wall here isn't really exactly important. That's just kind of where the hook fits in. And it's really just a wall for the clamping. So it's got somewhere for the hook to go. It didn't really come out right. It's not necessarily a necessity, but I'm going to make it thicker just so it comes out better. And that's something I'm going to change on the CAD files. After the first attempt, I clamped it together a lot better and I slammed it in a vise. And this is what we got. Not good, but definitely much better. And I think I know why this didn't fill up all the way. Well, I mean, the outright reason why is the pour spout cooled off before the entire mold cavity could be filled. And then I did an attempt 3 off camera, and this one actually looks like a jig. The only issue with this one is it's not perfect. I rushed pouring it in just to beat that time from the mold spout cooling off. And it's got some like little air holes and dimples in the front. But I mean, I guess technically this would be a functional jig. So it's definitely something that works. It definitely needs a little bit more fine tuning. I think the biggest thing for the mold is number one, I screwed up, which you can kind of see here. It's on this half. I was afraid the hook wasn't fitting in right, so I kind of cut it out more with the utility knife, and that's why there is lead pouring out the back of the hook shank. And it looks like my tolerance for where the eye goes is a little on the big side. And that's why you have, sorry, it's not really focusing. That's why you have this flashing around the front of the bait and around the hook eye. This is what the store-bought jigs look like. I probably should have made it the same size, but I believe this is, probably says it somewhere. Yes, this is 1.5 ounces versus an ounce jig. So the surface finish, obviously on the store-bought mold's better, but the hook, for my liking, is way too freaking big,
and it's not like one of those. I like those black nickel hooks that are stronger. And with blackfish, you really got to crank down the drag. So I'm kind of worried about straightening out that hook. And this collar gets in the way for putting the crab on. Plus, I like a shorter shanked hook because they're very, very difficult fish to hook up with. So with that being said, this will definitely work, but I am going to put this project on the back burner for now. I got a lot of stuff coming down on the pipeline that's a little bit more important, I think, and I think you guys will like it better too than this. Unless you guys really want me to finish this, then I'll keep going with it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to change up the CAD files as much as I can. I'm going to make these walls thicker. I'm going to tighten the tolerances up here. And I'm also going to make this pour spout bigger. And I'll post that online. I'm going to post the CAD files with that too for free. So if any of you guys know how to use CAD, you're welcome to change it to your liking and hopefully get it working a little bit better than I did. But number one right now, I'm working on redoing all my soft plastic molds. I found this new stuff I'm very excited to test out. It's supposed to be very similar to the Z-Man, the Elastic, like that super stretchy TPE plastic. I'm very excited to get that going. It's a little expensive, so I want to get all my molds in a row before I do it. So I'm reprinting all my molds now, and I'm going to line them all up and shoot them, and we're going to see how that works, which I'm hoping it should be very well. I also finished up 2 new hard baits. These are going to be some saltwater ones. This is a 4-inch lipless crankbait. I made it for catching striped bass down deep. I'm sure it would work for any large fish down deep. And then I also made this shallow swimmer for striped bass. This works excellent. I'm going to print out the bodies of both of these and make videos and assembly guides on them. I also know I promised a tutorial series. I'm going to take 1 soft plastic bait and 1 hard bait. And my goal for that is just to make a tutorial for you guys from a picture to making an actual bait. That way you guys can design your own. And you don't have to rely on me for making baits, because that's the best part about bait making is you come up with an idea for a fishing lure in your head, and then you get to make it yourself and go catch fish on it. That's really where most of the joy comes from. So I'm hoping once that's going to be a little while. I got a lot of different tutorials I got to do and a lot of stuff I got to knock out for that. But hopefully after that comes out, you guys will be able to make your own baits too. And that's pretty much it. I should have the new files for these up a few days after the video goes up. And I'm going to go cracking on that now. Have a good one and see you guys in the next video.